All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. So, in the previous video, we discussed about the first case study of February-March 2026 paper. And we're now going to go over the second case study of Feb-March 24, which is about Yvette's wet. Now, let's read the case study first, and then we're going to go over the questions. So it says that Yvette is a managing partner at YV, which is a veterinary practice in country P, right? So it's a veterinary business. So basically, animal doctors. There are four partners of YV, each of whom is fully qualified and experienced veterinary surgeon, right? So there are four partners who are part of the business. They're qualified, they're experienced. Each partner specializes in the care of different types of animals, right? So everybody is handling different aspects of the business. And then if you look at ahead, it says that table 2.1 shows something about the cash flows. Now, overall, so far, we know that YV is a veterinary practice business in country P. It is a partnership business. There are four qualified vet surgeons. And so far, there are three main areas, which is that the business ownership is partnership, and they're basically specializing as in a veterinary service. And then Yvette specializes in the care of small animals like dogs, cats, and rodents. Furthermore, this cash flow statement is something which is very important to understand, and that is that if you look at this cash flow forecast, YV is facing a cash flow issue. And that cash flow issue is primarily because of the fact that their closing balance is negative and then zero in May. That means over the period, they're facing cash flow problems. Now, this does not necessarily means that the business is unprofitable. It just means that cash won't be available in March and April to meet the expenses in time. So therefore, even why we would need to manage something like get a source of finance, an overdraft, perhaps a short-term loan. So the biggest issue here is March, because primarily because of this inventory spending, right? So the inventory spending of $12,000 is causing the total outflows to be greater than the total inflows, therefore leading to a negative cash balance. And then that spills over to the next few months. And by May, you have a closing balance of zero, meaning that you're in cash shortage, and then you would have a net zero cash flow in your closing balance by the end of May. So that means it's a cash flow problem that they have to manage. And then you're given something that Yvette is proposing a merger between YV and AV, which is YV's main competitors in City P. And figure 2.1 shows you some sales data about the veterinary service in market in country in City P. So we have some sales figures. We have the pie chart here. So the first thing that I would do over here is I would calculate the market shares of each business in percentage here so that I have some perspective here, right? So if I calculate JH share, so first I need to calculate the total market sales. And the total market sales are going to be 230,000 plus 160 plus 210 plus 200. And if you add all of them up, you get 800,000, right? So in this case, what I can do is I can calculate the total market share. So YV's share is going to be 230 divided by 800 times 100. And that is going to give you, so 230 divided by 800 times 100, that gives you 28.75. So this is 28.75%. Then you can calculate the market share of JH, which is 160 upon 800 times 100. And that would come out to be 20%. You can calculate AV's shares. That's 210 upon 800 times 100. And that's going to be somewhere around, so 210 divided by 800 is going to give you 26.25. So 26.25%. And lastly, we can calculate the market share of ST, which is 200 over 800 times 100, and that would give you 25%, right? So there are four main businesses here. YV is the market leader with the highest market share, and JH has the lowest market share. So we can use these as an application point here. And there's a question there as well. So this case study is something which is not content intensive. It's just that there are some technical stuff, the technical information like the cash flows, like the pie charts, which the examiner is expecting you to interpret. Now let's read the questions first. So it says that you need to identify one possible feature of a partnership. So again, possible answers here are just state them. So it's owned by two or more people. You can write about it's an unincorporated business. You can write about unlimited liability. You can write about decision making is shared, right? You can write about setup by partnership agreement, right? So either of these answers would be sufficient. So any one feature you can identify, and that would give you 2 out of 2. Similarly, let's look at case study, the second question, which is explain the term inventory, right? So when you're explaining the term inventory, inventory is the stock of goods or materials held by the business, right? It can be finished goods, raw materials, or work in process. Now, in this case, you can apply it by saying okay, for YV, what could inventory hold? So, because it's a veterinary business, they would have pet medicine, food, bandages, veterinary supplies, right? So, for YV, inventory would include medicines, pet food, bandages, or veterinary supplies, right? So that's what inventory is, and we have applied it to the case study, and that's sufficient to get 3 out of 3. Question number part B says refer to figure 2.1 and calculate the combined market shares of YV. Since we've already calculated their individual shares, so YV and AV, we can calculate their combined market share, which is 28.75 plus 26.25. So for part B2, B1, sorry. So combined market share of AV and YV is going to be 28.75 plus 26.25, which is 55%. Right? An alternative method of calculating this would be that you can first calculate the combined sales, right? So combined sales of both businesses are 230 plus 210. So you can do 230 plus 210, and you would get 440. You can then, so total sales of the market were 800 as we calculated before. So combined market share would have been 440 divided by 800 times 100. That's going to be 55%. Right. So both of these methods would give you the same answer. The examiner would credit either of them. So the first three questions are not something which is very difficult for us to do because these are pretty straightforward and therefore not something that we need to worry about. The thing that we need to worry about is the 8 and 12 marks. So first, let's go over this part B2, which is explain one factor that influences the supply of vet services in CTP. Right? So supply ka factor we need to discuss. You can talk about number of qualified vets. You can talk about cost of running a vet practice business there, availability, rent and property costs, government regulations, right? So either of these could be fine. So let's go over availability of qualified surgeons. Let's say costs, right? So part B2. So one factor that influences the supply of vet services is the availability of qualified veterinary surgeons, right? So YV has 4 qualified surgeons, which means that they can provide a wider range of treatment services. And if there are more qualified vets in the city, the supply of vet services will increase, right? So a factor explained with application to the case study that would give you complete full 3 out of 3 marks. So identify the factor, explain how it affects the supply, and then apply it to the case study that you have. Moving on, we have part C, which is analyze 2 methods that they can use to improve their cash flows, right? So the possible methods that you can talk about is that they can obviously delay payments to supplier, reduce credit sales. You can also talk about that they can also debt factoring they can use. They can also talk about reducing inventory levels, right? So these things could be a way to talk about this. You can also talk about that they can arrange an overdraft, they can reduce other expenses, right? So if you go back to this cash flow statement, now this is something which is relevant to our analysis. You should first understand that there are cash flow problems because the opening balance in March is negative. So you're already starting with an overdraft. You're already starting with a negative cash balance, right? And in addition to that, the net cash flow is also negative. So that's why it's increasing the total cash negative balance. Here, there is an inventory payment that you're making, which is a very significant amount to the total outflows. And then you can see over here that the credit sales of the business are greater than the cash sales, which means that cash is delayed when reaching the business, right? So now you should focus on how this affects the cash flows. And remember, you need to make sure that you know the distinction between cash and profits, right? So let's talk about this. So one way in which YV can improve their cash flows is by reducing the level of inventory or delaying the inventory purchase, right? So this is my first point, which gives me knowledge marks. And then I'm going to link it with the case because it's something which is very easy to get numbers out of and we can make it relevant. So we'll say in March, inventory spending is $12,000, which is the single largest cash outflow. This means that if YV purchases or negotiates to pay suppliers later, the total cash outflows in March would reduce. This means that the net negative cash flow of 7,000 will improve, improve, and therefore increase the closing balance. Therefore, allowing YV to meet its operational expenses on time, right? Another way, right? But we can also say, but this method can result in low inventory levels, which may reduce reduce YV's ability to meet customer demand, right? So that you can talk about. So it's a method. So you can talk in the analysis, you can talk about the methods pro and con, and that both of them would count as analysis. Second point is that you can encourage faster payments from credit customers. So obviously we discussed that the number of credit customers is greater. So you can say, okay, why we can improve another way, sorry. So start with the connective, another way, why we can improve its cash flows is by reducing the credit sales, right? So currently, a significant portion of the total sales is on credit. And you can also use the figures exactly from the case, which is that 12, 11, and 12,000, which is greater than cash sales, right? So 12,000 in March and May, and 11,000 in April, right? If YV offers discounts or early payments or ask the customers to pay immediately, more cash will be available with the business and cash inflows would occur sooner. This improves cash inflows and therefore improves the closing negative balances, but this may lead to customer dissatisfaction. Right. So these are the two methods that you've analyzed. So in 2 paragraphs, that's sufficient. And lastly, then the last question is that you need to evaluate the most likely impact of the proposed merger. So the proposed merger was that they're proposing a merger between YV and AV, YV's main competitor in CDP, right? So in this case, we also saw that. So it says that what you need to do is you need to talk about what would be the impact of this merger on the one of the stakeholders. So start by identifying what the stakeholder is. So again, because the merger directly affects ownership, control, profits, we can talk about partners. That partners may be affected, or we can talk about customers, employees, suppliers, or competitors, right? So for the sake of this question, what I'm going to do is I would talk about the partners as the stakeholder group, right? So, but in the exams, you have the leverage to talk about either of them. So one stakeholder group affected by the proposed merger is the partners, right? You can say for YV partners, the merger increases the market power of YV. Now you can talk about this. Since the combined market share post merger would be 55%, it would give them a greater market share and hence increase their sales revenue by reducing the level of competition, right? This would result in higher sales and ability to charge higher prices, which results in greater profitability and competitive position for YV, right? So that's the first thing. Okay, what is the impact and what's the benefit? Now we need to evaluate this impact, right? So therefore, the merger will positively impact YV's profits and partners would get greater share. However, the extent to which this benefit will occur will depend on whether costs are controlled or not. If operational expenses increase by a greater percentage due to transitioning and training, and the merger becomes expensive, profitability may fall in the short term. Right? So this is the evaluation for the first point. फिर उसके बाद we're going to talk about what's the other impact on these stakeholders, right? We can say the merger may also another impact on partners is that the merger may also reduce the control of YV's existing four partners, right? At the moment, they share the decision making, but if they merge with AV, there will be more partners involved. This could make the decision making slower and prone to disagreements. Okay? As a result, clashes may arise, which can potentially reduce the effectiveness of the merger, especially when partners of both firms have different management styles. Therefore, the merger can negatively impact partners by reducing their decision making power. However, the extent to which this will occur depends on how um, different the management perspectives are, and whether YV has a merger agreement in place or not. If everything is sorted and well written, conflicts reduce, and this limitation becomes less significant, right? So we discussed okay, what's the problem now, and to what extent that problem would arise. And lastly, we're going to give an impact. So overall, whether it would be positive or negative. So let's say I go with the positive, right? So overall, the most likely impact on YV's partners is positive in the long term, as the merger would create a new business with 55% of the market, which can significantly help them become a monopoly. But overall, whether they would benefit or not would depend on whether the uh, synergies occur after the merger or not. If the merger results in diseconomies of scale and cultural clashes, then the impact would largely be negative. But overall, it depends on whether both businesses are able to manage the merger effectively or not, and whether they are able to smoothly transition into their combined firm or not. Right? So the judgment, justification, and at the end, what factor does the judgment depends on? And that in all is Feb March 2026 paper two's case number 2. Thank you.